Ist mir nicht unangenehm. Hallo, hallo. Hallo, hallo. Thank you, welcome. Hallo Clarissa, hallo Julia. Hallo Anna, hallo Martin, hallo Lionel.
Fragenmikro, hallo lieber Lionel. Genau, nicht ganz nass machen. Genau, das wäre jetzt das that I have ever met. And this is just a glorious experience being here in the PATHOS Theater doing a sound check. Awesome.
Wie hört sich das an, wenn sie hier spricht? Und ist das dort auch? Ja myślę, może tak leżeć, prawda? Bo ja myślę, że to będzie dźwięk ok, to wystarczy. To jest będzie, jak i teraz jak miałaś maskę. Tak, to teraz
So we're starting, aren't we? Hello, everybody. As you know, my name is Anna Baumgartner from the Deutsch-Polnische Gesellschaft München, Towarzystwo Polsko-Niemieckie Monachium. I warmly welcome you here at PATHOS Museum and also at home via YouTube for our last and most intense festival day with a full program. We're celebrating the Polish-German dialogue and discussing various aspects. Artists from different disciplines how they deal now or how they have dealt in the past years with, well, different aspects, as I said. We started with a theater from Węgajty, which is active in a small village in northeastern Poland, where the theater company combines theater work with social activism already since the early 1980s, when the Solidarność movement had failed. Yesterday, we had literature and music. The author Brigida Helbig presented her newest book, Kleine Himmel in Polish Niepko, with a focus on identity, history, and traumatas, which go back to the time of World War II, and she was accompanied by the Polish-German jazz legend Leszek Żądło. If you have missed an event, feel free to join our new Instagram account, DPG München. There you already find some impressions, and there will follow more. Today, as I already said, we have a full program. Later in the evening, there will be a film screening of Impreza, the celebration, which deals with Polish-German family relations nowadays. And in between, there is time for a come together with Polish barszcz and pierogi. But firstly, now we will have a focus on the visual arts and discuss the current political situation and how artists in Poland react on it, and how they try to build a counter-narrative through the visual sphere against right-wing popular politics. Weronika Zalewska, she's sitting right next to me here in the theater. We see her, but I think on YouTube not yet. She's already with us from the beginning of the festival. Already on Thursday, we could celebrate her video installation, the opening of it, which you all can explore today till the evening over there. Veronica, I warmly welcome you also today. It's a pleasure to work with you and have you here. Thank you for all your enthusiasm and input for the festival, despite all complications which had to be dealt with in these crazy times. And first of all, before Veronica starts with her talk, I want to introduce her to you. Weronika Zalewska is an intermedia artist, a graduate of Multimedia-Design at the Royal Academy Kask in Ghent. She works with video installations, sculptures, and interventions in which she addresses issues such as the urban landscape, futurology, ecology, and anthropology. She is particularly interested in post-artistic merging of art, activism, philosophy, and science, its potential to develop more polyphonic, sensitive perspectives and practices beyond the institutional market-based art. She's recently moved back to Poland and is currently based in Warsaw, where she has, as I found out, just started her master's studies at the Academy of Fine Arts in Warsaw, and she's very active in the art scene in Warsaw. But she's also not totally new here in Munich in the art scene, because she was here already in the winter time, being part acting at the play Zehn Vaterunser at the Münchner Kammerspielen, directed by Christiane Huber, who is today also here. Veronika practices everyday forms of resistance, and I think when she comes back to Poland, there will be a lot to protest against again. Maybe we can talk about that later. She looks up to her curious friends, strangers, and believes in the power of education. And about that, she talks today in her lecture. But Veronika, before you start, could you maybe tell us a little bit more about your video installation, which you prepared especially for our festival? And now, the stage is yours.
Okay, so starting with the installation that I made, which is right in front of me actually, I can still see it. It does have a connection to the lecture in a way that it puts in a more metaphorical perspective the idea of being activated and participating in the social-political realm, but also somehow sometimes wishing to escape it so that you discover the parts of your life that are not constantly politicized. So the installation is called Between the Need of Self-Care and Response, and it's a 3-channel video, and it started actually from one video that I made in the outskirts of Warsaw in a very busy street, where the nearby trees just next to the road were sprayed with this orange spray, signed to be cut actually. So there was all these numbers on the trees from 26 to I think 140 something, that when I was biking I could see one after the other, and they were just signed so that later they could be cut. So I made a video of that, and that is now a core of the installation, and I reversed it so that actually the numbers are going down. They're counting down from the biggest to the lowest, to the smallest. And then the other part of the video is the mirroring 2 screens that are showing ASMR videos. So these very trending videos that are made to make people relaxed, to release themselves, and they're very much working with the sensuous connection between the vision and the sound. They're somehow also quite pervert in a big part. I mean, they're using objects and touch in quite particular ways. And I found some videos that have the orange as their main theme, and I made like a found footage video from that. So the orange becomes this symbolic theme. It symbolizes also some kind of warning, a sense of urgency, and it starts from the sprayed trees, and then it goes down to being something that's just like a pleasurable view for the ASMR video. So it's just this contrary play between the 2 elements. And then in the back of the installation, you can hear the sounds of the road, of the cars passing by. And then in the front, next to the ASMR videos, you can hear the sound of the numbers counting. The numbers are counting connection to the trees, but I'm counting them up. While they're going down in the video, I am counting them up. So they symbolize this hope, but maybe also a sense of naivety that humans have towards the ecological situation. And I don't want to over-talk it, so maybe that's enough for now. And I'm going to move on to the lecture. The title of the lecture is Artivism in Poland, Artistic Strategies as Means to Direct Response. And I'm going to mostly focus on the context of now, but I will also bring in some examples from the past, from the 70s and 80s, somehow laying out the tradition of also situationism and the borders between art and activism blurring. So I will read a little bit, and well, art and activism has a very widespread connection, and it's impossible to bring it all in. On one hand, from the perspective of direct activism, you can consider the subversive, imaginative banners during the protests as art, or the ways the activists gather or hack the corporate websites can be art. On the other hand, strictly in the context of art history, or its traditional narrative, which I'll be trying to break a little bit today, artists touching upon the socio-political dialogue in their work can also be activists, even within this gallery white cube context. Taking the German example, artivism can be related as much to the tradition of Bertolt Brecht, Joseph Beuys, but also to the anti-fascist collectives such as Peng. So what will we focus on today? I would like to show you the art meeting activism in Polish examples, and how the artistic practices and strategies can be used beyond the purely artistic context, beyond the museum and gallery, as means of direct response to the socio-political struggle, and making it a little bit more complex, let's say. I would like to begin with a short video on the very iconic movement started in Wrocław, Breslau, called the Orange Alternative, which is the very absurd response to the absurdities of the 80s in Poland and the police state and the very fading or the very ending communism. You do not see the subtitles. I will actually translate it to you because we haven't noticed that the subtitles are being eaten up, so I will just be saying what it's saying. On the walls, slogans have been painted over. Solidarity fights on, solidarity will prevail. The winter is yours, the spring is ours. I saw these white patches, and then when I got the idea of painting dwarfs on these spaces, one summer night, a friend and I came out and painted our first dwarf, and then another, and so on. We visited Warsaw, Krakow, and Gdańsk, and painted dwarfs on these spaces. The originator was a student of a history and art history, Waldemar Friedrich, known as Major. He put forward the theory of social surrealism. He said our life was so absurd that it was a work of art itself. Out of this theory arose the idea of organizing independent street happenings. The first happening took place in June 87. That was the beginning of the Orange Alternative. The dwarves left the walls and entered the streets. I'd organized happenings earlier, before solidarity and martial law, but they were on smaller scale. The dwarves had a lot of publicity. They looked like drawings. Martial law had not yet been forgotten, and here the militia were arresting dwarves. Then we had the toilet paper campaign. They started running in people with toilet rolls. They examined people's back. The October Revolution was a winner. They stopped anyone dressed in red. The militia had orders to arrest Reds. Someone had a banner saying, an 8-hour day for police officers. Red Army, cavalrymen, wary run in. I will jump a little bit. And I'll make it more quiet. Okay, so you can see this satirical metaphor of the dwarves, the little people invisible to the system. In the meantime, orange is the color of warning, of urgency. So Orange Alternative is like a race of the invisible ones, the ones you can oversee, step on, who are now coming out of the corners, and in their multitude, they're becoming viral. Looking at the communist times in general, I believe the humor played a crucial role both as a means of releasing the tensions connecting to living in a police state, but also to see beyond, to laugh this difficult reality through, and through this laughter somehow surpass the reality, to show that we can imagine more, do more, and that this state, however it considers itself supreme, it's still temporary. talking about the orange alternative only in terms of art is also limiting the understanding, because somehow it was also a political movement, anti-communist in the first years and then anti-establishment, using artistic strategies such as happening. The activities of Orange Alternative were based on street speeches to which ordinary people were invited to, distributing posters and leaflets. It was also inviting to play. It was very much coming out of this situationist tradition without even knowing about it, perhaps. So the situation of making the cartoonish Orange Dwarf revolution possible had a sense of recklessness, of having nothing to lose, and through that somehow brought back the power to the protesters. Just the act of playing out a role while protesting, making this carnival of symbols and role plays, is like giving a broken mirror to the state and to the politicians, saying, if you're playing with us, we'll play with you too. Perform our state into the borderline absurd situation, and you'll never probably laugh back. You'll stay there protecting your state while we'll be, accepting the fact that we'll be arrested. We will accept the role play that we have, and we will still manage to surpass it through art and activism. And I will still play you part of an interview. They were also very young folks, actually. You can really see it pretty well. I will also translate it to you as it's going. I believe it satisfies the possibility of unconscious need. Oops. Many people have for play, for variety in our daily grayness. For standing aside. If you can't distance yourself from this grayness, you can go crazy. People were disillusioned by politics, by official politics in the 1981, and by politics of the opposition. 2 years ago, when there was nothing but talk and no results, there were only declarations, appeals, and nothing. Here we have people who set out to crazy things, handing the militia flowers, for instance. I believe that the system is based on a universal agreement to stay silent, on passive acceptance. We think we are outside of the system, but it's our passivity that underpins it. Okay, and I will go back to the presentation. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So here you can see some images from the Orange Revolution. Not revolution, the alternative, not to be mistaken with the Ukrainian Revolution. This is a very funny situation where there is the T-shirt talk, which says, go away with the heat. But actually, if you take away one letter, it will say, go away with the cups, in a very bad word. And actually, they were going around and somehow making some of the letters disappear. And most of the time, the U letter was the one disappearing. So it was very performative, and actually it connected a little bit to the next example that I have. So the next example I have is a very interesting collective that was called Akademia Ruchu, so the Academy of Movement, and it was a collective embedded both in theater and visual arts that was very much also playing out these street situations. So apart from performances, it organized theatrical actions similar to happenings, and they were one of the first groups in Poland already in '73 to take to the streets and creating performances in the urban space. The pretext for these theatrical actions were ordinary activities and simple scenes performed against the spectators. So it was very much a gesture of today, of the daily reality. And they were very much also using the satire of the communist context. And for instance, here on the image, you can see the fake queues that they were making outside of the shops. So in the communist times, it was very popular, common situation to just have giant queues for everything that was coming into the shops. So the Academia Ruchu was creating queues in a place that was closed, for instance, and then it was very often making the passerbys think that there is actually something to wait for, and then they would just actually join without even knowing what they are out to get. Here you also have a performance of falling and just like stumbling on a street as somehow a symbol for just giving attention and causing some kind of breaking in this reality that seems very gray and constant and unchanging, especially in the 70s and in the 80s. Here the performers kind of resemble this beach situation on one hand, so they're just laying there resting, but they're also symbolizing a sense of passivity, of like a defeat. And they also did that in a public space. There is also an example that I have on a video. I'm going to show it in a second. And this is an example of performers just buying a newspaper, looking at it, and then throwing it out to the bin. So you can see these very small, intimate gestures of the daily life that were brought into their performance practice. And I can quote Constante Puzyna, so the founder of the Academia Ruchu. He said, however, these banal signs of banal activities and banal situations always have a shade of strangeness. They transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. They make the viewers, participants, passerbys look unexpectedly at the elements of everyday life in which they live with a new look, like something they have never seen before, and wonder why this something suddenly appears funny or meaningless, or on the contrary, a poetic beauty. This is also a very interesting example. It's a little bit more embedded in going into the theater context outside of the public space, or it's on the edge of it. And here you see a leftover bus that the audience was going into. They were sitting down as the passengers, and actually the only thing happening during the performance was an immense noise. And the performance would happen for 15, 20, 30 minutes, and the performers were just sitting. So the performers were also becoming this situation of nothingness and losing the sense of time, which was also a way of manifesting activism. This is the last example of Academia Ruchu, which will bring us to the contemporary times. So this example is actually a banner that the Academy made, and the banner is a mirror reflection of the court in Warsaw, which says, fairness is the space of power and endurance of Poland, of the Republic of Poland. So it was interesting because it came out from the law court wall, it came out of the official building, and it became a mirror on the other side of the street. So somehow it became activated by the people kind of digesting the message and showing that they're actually seeing it and that they're trying to embody it outside of these walls of the institution. And this was actually remade in 2016, where there was a huge wave of protests when the law courts were being politicized. And it was a very big happening because actually the tri-division of democracy in Poland was completely becoming blurred out, and the judges were being politically chosen by the ruling party, which now affected actually in what happened 3 days ago, so the ban of the abortion. And yes, it was made by the students and this collective pretty much based in Warsaw called Consortium for Post-Artistic Practices. And actually, it's a collective that exists in a very fluid way. It invites people just to be there, you know, in the communication. And whenever there is a sense of activist urgency, they just call out and anybody can propose something like a art and activism project, and then people connect into the work groups and something appears outside of a sense of authorship. We also don't really use this name. I mean, I participate in a group, but we most of the time just don't mention it. We are really this fluid collective of sometimes even, you know, more than 100 people activating it themselves depending on when they want to go out and do something. So this was something that was very much connected with Akademia Ruchu. It was like a reenactment, and it showed this mirroring of the institution, which ironically forgot what it was promising to do. So the fairness, the egalitarianism. And it actually went on a walk around Warsaw, so it also like was taken down from the wall and it went to have a walk in a public space, which is also very interesting. Then another example of this art and activism connection is something that we did a year ago in the 11th of November, which is the day of Polish independence, as well as the end of the First World War. And it's a day when there was a huge nationalist march in Warsaw. It's a very sad day where you see thousands of people on the streets, like very bullied up, just wanting to, in the biggest part, expose their patriotism in a very wide, closed sense. And there is a lot of racist and xenophobic words being said aloud on that day. So as the opposition, there was also an anti-fascist gathering. It was more in a form of a party than a march, let's say. And with a group of people also from the consortium, we gathered up and we asked Polish graphic designers to reinvent the sign of the anti-fascism, so the 3 falling arrows. And they made very beautiful, playful designs that we printed out as huge flags. They were 3 meters wide, and they were made into flags. And then our friend Bożena Wydrowska, who does voguing and who's a dancer, she also like made a choreography for us that we could like very nicely sweep the streets with like colors and signs of tolerance. Yeah, and we are still using the flags in different moments, different protests. They are still being activated, so they just became this very playful object that can be activated artistically and in different contexts between feminism, ecology, anti-fascism. Yes. And now I will give you an example that is also reenactment, and it happened this May, very recently. And here you can see an image that is actually like a tapestry made by Gośka Matsuga, but the image shows a performance of Tadeusz Kantor from 1967, and the performance was there were 7 performers that were postmen, postwomen, and they were carrying this empty letter that was just signed to that gallery that it was going to, so the Foxal Gallery, and it was also symbolizing very much the times. It was 1967, and even though the letter was empty, somehow you could see the sense of censorship also being carried as a metaphor. And actually the action was also escorted by police, like believing it's actually like quite a neutral thing that is happening. The police also escorted the action that the performers could calmly go into the gallery space. And in the meantime, there was an audio that was informing the people located in the gallery what's happening on the street with the performers, and that was made in this form of like sports commentary. So it was very humorous also. And we took up this example in this year when these crazy elections were supposed to happen. So the Polish government was supposed to make elections in May in the letter form, but actually they haven't really made any plan to make it secure, to make it safe, to make it transparent. And still a week before the elections, it wasn't sure that it would happen, and nobody knew how, and nobody really knew the transparent principles that the government would be making or not. So with a group of friends and strangers, we came together also under a consortium, and we just made this letter that was referring to Tadeusz Kantor, and instead of addressing it to the gallery that Kantor was addressing it to, we addressed it to the sovereign Poland and to the parliament. And our idea was to actually bring it from the official post in Warsaw to the parliament and to actually bring it in. The letter was more than 14 meters long. It had 7 people. We were distanced by 2.20 meters, I believe. And it was saying, it's quite hard to explain it, like translated from Polish, but it was saying this very popular idiom, which says, to live, not to die. But I will now make it a little bit more clear, because normally this term means to live fully, to live in the moment, to be spontaneous, but we put a comma in a different place. So we put a comma in a sense that it meant to live not, to die. It sounds very dramatic when you translate it, but actually it was pretty humorous, and it was just reflecting the recklessness of the government of actually not taking care of the health of the people, not making any transparent decisions, and just keeping us totally in a confusion that was already caused by a pandemic, but it was also caused by the political manipulation that used the pandemic to make very strange, edgy, blurry decisions like this election that was supposed to happen. We also had very nice post stamps from with the symbol of coronavirus. So we actually took the path to the parliament. We met with politicians that took it in and handed it to the parliament, so it actually physically happened. The letter did end up inside. But what else happened is that a few weeks later, actually I think it was even less than 2 weeks, we ended up getting letters with fines. So at first, actually the protest, I mean the action, the artistic action was legitimized on paper in the way that we had a paper saying that we are at work. It's quite complicated because artist is sometimes at work even without being hired, right? Because you can make a painting, you can make an action that then will become something else, and it will only later on bring you the money, or it might not even bring you the money, you're just doing it as your artistic practice. That is not less work when it's not paid. It's very complicated to the system, it's very hard to prove it, but we got a paper from Fundacja Benzmiana, so this very lovely art publisher, art and activism publisher, that said that we are legitimately artists. So the police actually checked our papers, they saw the distance, they saw that we are wearing the masks, and they agreed that it's actually okay and that they will in fact escort us. So by accident, by a strange happening, the police actually ended up escorting us without us asking them. So we repeated what happened in '67, because Tadeusz Kantor was also escorted by police, which is pretty interesting. So at first we thought it was safe because we were actually protected by the police. But then when we ended up at the parliament, I think the police realized that it's something that is beyond artistic and it's also a political action. And then they kind of got a little bit more edgy and they wrote us down because of not keeping the distance. They just made themselves a reason. So these 2 weeks later, we got a fine, and it was almost 2,500 500 euros per person, and it was from the state sanitary, and it was a fine for not keeping the distance, even though we were actually one of the only humans on the streets. As you see, it's just this ironic image of empty streets of Warsaw and us carrying it around. It's probably one of the only strong visual images that remain from the pandemic times in the springtime, actually. But even though we got the fine, and it was like a blunt example of censorship, while actually not having done anything that wouldn't be secure, we have gotten a huge amount of support. We got a free lawyer that was an amazing woman protecting us in case of the law court situation. And actually, very quickly, we got the media attention as well. And I think the sanitary and also the government itself panicked in a way of noticing how ridiculous was this finding and this censorship. I mean, it was just a very spacious artistic reflection on the ironies that we are living in. But we did got the support. We did this crowdfunding for the fines that we got, and we actually collected even more than we hoped. It ended up being something like 25,000 euros. So for the 10 people, because together it was 10 of us switching the roles, it was just enough to pay the fines. We had the fines cancelled actually, so we never had to pay the money at the end. The situation is not completely finished because some of us are not having addresses in Warsaw, so it's still closing down, but we are believing not to have any law court anymore. And the money will actually be used to have a solidarity fund for artists being subjected to censorship, which I believe will be something that is and will be happening a lot these days, unfortunately. I mean, we see it happening, and we already have people to give the money to. We just have to create the structure of the foundation to actually do it in a transparent way, to distribute the money to the biggest urgencies. However hard it is to actually rate what is the biggest urgency, of course. Another strong image from the pandemic I have is these posters that actually appeared in the public space, mostly in the metros and on the streets, just on the day of the elections that were supposed to happen. So that's another strong image that actually reflected on this very ironic political situation. And what you're seeing behind is a poster saying, "I desperately need change." And it's a very simple, raw poster, which has a sense of also connection to the Polish narrative, because it's using the red and white color, so it's using the color of the Polish flag, but it's completely blurring it out. It's making it into this pink. And also how the poster was made is very interesting, because it was actually made by 3 makers, performers, actually doing it with their bodies, really like wrapping themselves around the poster. So without even audience realizing it, it's a very bodily, intimate, a really embodied work. And I would actually like to say something more about it. So the poster was painted by the bodies of the authors of the project, so Marta Jalowska, Edka Jarząb, and Sebastian Winkler. It became a platform for transmitting the presence of those bodies materially excluded by the pandemic from public space. So actually it was supposed to become a theater piece, and it only ended up being present as posters for many months. The action was prepared with the framework of the residency program Common Ground in Komuna Warsaw. The subject matter of the cycle, which refers to common grounds, was unexpectedly sharpened before the pandemic. It forced a review of previous diagnoses of what a common ground is. Here you can see a slogan saying, "I'm your president," but it has the feminative, which is existing in Polish language. So it says, "I'm your female president." That's very important. And it makes a clear distinction between the president and a woman president. The other slogans used in the posters directly relate to the issue of visibility and disclosure, recognizing yourself as the only homosexual person, revealing that you have an intimate life, it's very interesting because it very much connected the feminist discourse and the conversation about politics. So wanting the politics to be the space of feminism, empathy, of participation, but also of vulnerability. And the other slogans were saying, "Am I the only homosexual here? Thank you for your vote, I love you." That's the one that you're seeing now. "Let's do something." And then another one was saying, "How are your teeth? Can you afford the cure?" And I'm a very big fan of the work. I think it also very much connects to, asking like, what are we campaigning for? Who is the politics for? Like, who needs the female president and why? And what are our own intimate urgencies? Another example connected very much to the, also like visualizing the language also, is what happened here with Bart Staszewski, who is an activist and also a director. And I don't know if you've heard about it, but some of the villages in Poland, mainly in the south and in the southeast, actually made these LGBT-free zones. So however scary it is real. And they made within their documents about how the village or town is functioning, that the LGBT is not being practiced, that this ideology is not being welcomed and accepted as the existing one. And what he did actually is that he actually made this visible on a real street sign. So he made these street signs being placed in 5 different languages outside of these cities, I mean at the entrance of these cities, so that people could really see how scary and how real it's becoming. And many people actually thought, including me, that this happened. When I saw this image on Facebook, I did think that it was placed legitimately by the authorities of the towns and villages. And of course, it immediately makes you think of, the Nazi politics. I mean, the connection is so clear. It's just, free of Jews, free of LGBT. And and then he took pictures of like the gay and lesbian people in the village. It's really touching. And they were just the people that are inhabitants, and they were posing in front of the signs as just the symbol of visibility. And actually, even some politicians from abroad, from Poland, thought that it's real, and they have responded to it. But it's also an amazing example of activism and art actually making this very vivid embodiment of something that, whether it's, in art it's usually the imagination of the better, deeper, more complex, but here it's also embodying the worse and imagining what evil things can happen, because, I mean, they've happened before. It's not as abstract as it can seem to us. And now I want to bring the example of a particular one artist that I will focus on in a few of his examples. And it's Daniel Rycharski. He's a very interesting person also in a way that he's working with the theme of queerness and of LGBT in Poland, but in the context of villages. So he himself comes from a village, from Górówko, a village of a few hundred inhabitants, and he, after studying in Krakow, have decided to actually go back to the village and do his work there with the community. And he's very much connecting the Christian spirituality and the queer identity. And it's, of course, a very difficult connection to make, and he's very much working with the tradition and with the cliches of what the village is also. And as the result of the tight intertwining, he became to gravitate towards documenting the stages of the artist finding himself in the Catholic community, from the works full of activist fierceness and optimism to testimonies of progressive disillusionment with the institutional crampedness and closure to otherness. So he's also using the rural landscape. He's building pieces along the roadside crosses, chapels, and and fields. And what you see here actually, because I wanted to show it as the first example connecting to the previous one I made, this is a board that he made from metal that he actually molded from the old Jesus statues that were dumped in the trash. So he actually remolded this metal. And what he is doing here is that he is quoting the Catechism, I think that's how you say it in English also, talking about the homosexuals. And it's a quote that says that they should be treated equally with the compassion and with softness, and that they should not be, there should be no discrimination against them. And he actually made this, and he was pledging to the local church to put it outside, as very often there is boards put outside with memorials and sponsorships and so on. And he didn't manage to do that, but what he did was that he just stood with his own body with this very big board. It was also a very symbolic situation in a way that the architecture didn't want to accept it as the part of, the institution didn't want to accept it as the part of it. So he had to stand with his own body, kind of bearing the weight of the board. Here you can also see that he really made this situation of bringing the visual art into the village, and actually believing that visual art is not something that should stay in the institution, but also can be a matter of a dialogue for a community to go through their fears and struggles. This was actually a gallery, like a chapel gallery next to the street, that was also inviting artists from outside of the village to show their work. What you have here is a work called Cross, and it was actually a cross that was made from a tree. It's a very heavy story, but it's a tree on which a homosexual couple hung themselves in the south of Poland in a village, and Daniel actually cut the tree and he made a cross out of it, which he brought to different places, but he also brought it to the center of Warsaw, to the presidential palace. And presidential palace is full of crosses. I don't know if you know it, but also cross is very much taken as a symbol for the suffering of the ruling party, because they're every month celebrating the disaster, the plane disaster in which many officials died in Smolensk 10 years ago, but forgetting that many various people died in this disaster, they're always remembering the president of Poland that died there, who was a twin brother of the man ruling the country now. So here you can see the crosses celebrating Smolensk, and Daniel stood in front of them as an opposition of, taking over and monopolizing the discussion and the symbols, actually the religious symbols. So I will read a little bit about it. So the pronunciation of the material itself became very clear. A wooden cross was carved by Rycharski from a branch of the tree. And cross was also to avoid the fate of the museum object. The artist planned to make it available for the purposes of the church's way of the cross, where its pronunciation could naturally resonate with the ritual. The work of art would transform into the tool and symbol of torment, but also redemption. Eventually, however, Rycharski again clashed against the wall of the institution and set off on a lonely way of the cross to the presidential palace, where the relation to another famous cross standing there made the work gain another context. And from the work of cross, we can move on to the work of strachy, fears. You can translate the title in different ways, because strachy is both fears, but also these creatures that are supposed to scare the birds off from the fields. So it's actually also a very village symbol. And he actually also showed it very much in the galleries, but before that he put it on the fields of the village. And this is not longer one cross, but it's really a dense, colorful forest of crosses, not only in Latin type, but also the Orthodox crosses and the St. Andrew's cross. And on the structures painted in the bright colors, he unfastened and fixed with barbed wire the clothes, blouses, jeans, shirts that belonged to former homosexuals living in the countryside and who have experienced discrimination. This work is also found in the public space on a daily basis, but it's not and never was supposed to be in any of the places in Warsaw. He actually set it up locally. Here you can also see an installation that he made from broken tools, farmer tools, that was also showing the economic struggle of the farmers and the fact that they're very much forgotten and left behind by the system. And he made this beautiful symbols, kind of trying to move and trying to be aerodynamic while being just broken, outdated farmer tools. And then there is a piece which is also very interesting called Island from 2018, which connects actually the LGBT discrimination with the history of Jews, the local history. And it's located on a tidal island in the middle of a pond. And this pond was actually built by the forced Jewish workers back in the days. And one more time, it was also used in the film Pokłosie by Pasikowski. And this film Pokłosie is very much talking about this village redemption of the Jewish community and people actually committing the crime of killing the Jews by themselves in a Polish village. And Rycharski decorated the island with artificial flowers, the number of which was similar to the number of Jews inhabitants of Sierpc village just before the war. And the flowers themselves created a rainbow, thus weaving two excluded social groups. The picturesque location is marked by the traumatic history. It was not without a reason that the work was in the middle of the pond, as it was dug by the Sierpc Jews as the part of the forced labor. Here you can also see a beautiful fence installation that he made in front of one of farmers' house, which is celebrating the 150-year anniversary of taking down the feudal law. This is a debate place he made as like a temporary town square. This is a monument of chłop, so let's say a farmer, but it's a word that very much relates to the feudal system. So this feudal farmer subjected to, the division of not owning the land. And he made it also as this traveling sculpture that was supposed to both travel to the city and make visible the situation of the Polish farmers, but also was supposed to very much travel around the villages where people would gather around and come by feet and by bikes just to show the to see the sculpture as a monument that they actually don't have. And this is a picture from a recent action that Daniel did just a month or two ago. And it's actually a project that is just starting. It's very simple by the idea, but also very outspoken. And what he did is that he invited the local families from his village to adopt the LGBT people into their houses for a temporary time, for like a rebound from the city, as some kind of holiday and a way to encounter each other. I mean, it sounds like it could be something also strange, disturbing, maybe dangerous, to connect people perhaps from a conservative religious background to a gay person. But actually, Daniel was also very much navigating the whole process to keep it safe. And it's incredible because I also heard a radio program talking about it, how it just brought this encounter that would normally not be possible, that just made humans human. Here you just have the people that were hosting the LGBT community, like having these angel wings. It's a very simple, symbolic, but it also just makes a lot of symbols and metaphors very daily and real. And here you just see them having a dinner together. Yes, and that's an edgy transition. Yeah, and I think the examples are pretty much finished. I don't know how we are with time. Okay, it's been an hour, so it's fair enough. And what is behind me is actually a design of a poster for Women's Strike that has been going on for a while, I'm not sure how long, but I think for a few years now. And yeah, just 3 days ago, the abortion ban in case of the fetal, to say it in English, one moment. Fetal mutilations have been banned. So in case of a woman being pregnant with a child that is being very endangered, and it doesn't have, I don't know, lungs, it doesn't have a brain, it's bound to live for a few hours or a few days. Now they actually banned it, so it will not be possible, even in these very urgent cases, to make abortion. So pretty much a woman will be subjected to a trauma of being pregnant, and then whether experiencing the death or just raising a child that's not really capable of living. So now we entered another phase of protests, which have been happening for 2 days now, and they spread around the country. And of course, I mean, the corona situation is very urgent now, but also it's just been completely manipulated by the government in a way that they've done the voting just now in the Tribunal of Constitution that has been totally taken over by the politics. And they knew that they're doing it in a moment that people will not come out on the streets. They knew that otherwise they would just be raging as they did a few years ago on the black protests. So now actually they are raging, and there is thousands of people on the streets in different cities. And on Monday there will also be like blockades on the streets of any person that wishes just to like block the car movement. On Wednesday, women that want to engage, they will not go to work. So yes, there is this whole wave of response that I think the government didn't see coming, and I'm sure it will bring another wave of collective participation, but also very much creativity in the way that you respond. Yes, and I'm asking for solidarity somehow from your side also. I mean, whoever you can talk to about it, it's great to spread the message that something so terrible is happening to women in Poland. And I think it's a good way to end it.
Thank you, Veronica, so much for this really, really impressive lecture. I mean, we started to talk about your, being part of the art scene in Warsaw when we met in January at the Kammerspielen, and I already then had the feeling that it's really, really important that you tell here in Munich a little bit more about what is going on. And I mean, at that moment, there wasn't so much going on as we now got to know is happening now. And I know we've met then in July or August, it was. There were so many new things, and now again and again, and it's just, I think, I'm very, very glad that you came here and did not only show us your really great video installation, but also gave us an overview what's happening in the artistic scene. Because I think the problem here in Germany, also in the media, is that you always just hear about like the political sphere, what's happening there, but not really what people are doing against it. And here we really have very, very important examples how a civil and artistic movement is taking place in Poland, what we do not know here. And I'm really glad this is, I couldn't say more at the moment. And I even don't have now specific questions because, well, yes, I mean, I don't know, maybe here some people have questions, because I'm already just still thinking about all this material we could see now also on your presentation. And also what I want maybe as a comment also say that I'm also very glad that you made this historical You gave us this historical background, where it comes from, that it already has been, there had been in the 80s or starting in the 70s, this movement that artists tried to do with their art something against the political situation, and now it's happening again. I mean, we had this a little bit in the discussion with the Theater Vengaite, that also comparisons between that time of the early 70s, late 70s, early 80s, and now you showed us also like what's happening in the city. There we had the periphery, and here we have the city, where you really can not only work within, you know, a very hermetic sphere, but really there where the politic is happening. So this may be just as a comment, and now I would like to open the floor, and maybe there are questions. Because if not, I think that there will be questions. There will be many questions. Oh, there is one. Mm-hmm.
I don't really have a question. I just also
Maybe you should come here and just say something so that everyone...
I don't really have a question, Veronica. I just also wanted to double what you said. Thanks for coming and thanks for this great talk. It was super insightful, and I think also your the ending you made was really important also for asking for solidarity, because I think it's kind of really I'm deeply moved by what you said, and I also still have to process it. And it's, I think we have to spread the word first and see in a way how we as women here can kind of also now support you there. But in this important activism you're doing right now, but on the other side, it was also artistically, it was really inspiring, very much. Also that you put like Tadeusz Kantor and all these very important references and turned it into some contemporary artwork. Great, thanks. So maybe there's a question, but in the moment it's just like I'm moved and I have to process it. Thanks.
Yeah, and I would like to add that it might seem a little bit old-fashioned that I just focused on what happens on the street and not, for instance, what happens online, because there is just so much going on that is activism that happens in the internet in various ways. But I would like to say that these images also very much live online. They very much circle around through the social media, like what happened with the letter action, for instance. I mean, it only had a way to communicate itself through the image that was made during the performance. And I just think it's very interesting times that we live in a way that a lot of people say that we're stuck to our computers and we're very much here, but at the same time there's just such a civic response in so many countries that we have not seen a long time, and it just gives an example of still the urgency of just feeling this collective body on a street, like resisting and feeling the solidarity in the embodiment, like with Black Lives Matter, with what's happening in Belarus now. It's also amazing that we from a different country can also respond, even through the social media, through some kind of echoing to something that is also global. I mean, yeah, to an extent at least.
Is there another need for a question or a comment? Because if not, I think that we want to discuss with you and go on and ask you and maybe also share our feelings and about what we just heard. But I would say that we maybe do it now, not in this really situation of an official discussion, but do that during our come together, which gives us also the opportunity to continue this and maybe see what can be done. So thank you so much again.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Ja, danke euch beiden. glaube, wir können jetzt auch dann bei Pierogi und Barscht noch weiter sprechen. Dazu wollen wir euch dann auch ganz herzlich alle einladen. Thanks, Vero, for this inspiring and empowering lecture. Wir wollen uns aber jetzt auch noch ganz herzlich vom PATHOS oder im Namen des PATHOS bei den Initiatorinnen von TUI-ITAM, Anna Baumgartner und Elisabeth Redler bedanken. Vielleicht kommt ihr beide mal kurz nach vorne und auch Judith Huber, der künstlerischen Leitung, der schon die ganzen Geschenke aus dem Korb fallen. Würde ich jetzt auch gleich das Mikro übergeben. Euch wollte ich noch sagen, vielen, vielen Dank für die wunderbare Zusammenarbeit. Vero, you can stay, sorry. Vielen Dank. Ich hoffe, wir haben jetzt den deutsch-polnischen Dialog erst gestartet und es geht in irgendeiner Form, vielleicht unter angenehmeren Umständen, in nächster Zeit weiter. Vielen Dank euch. Ich übergebe jetzt mal an die Judith.
Ja, dann gebe ich dir diese 2 Flaschen. Also ich bin auch gerade noch total bewegt von your lecture. I'm really deeply moved and I hope we can think about how we as PATHOS Museum, as you said before, yes, you said the PATHOS Museum. I'm really glad that you said it because I really feel that it's like a museum. You made it like a museum. Veronica, thanks to you. And here, can you please take it? So, and I hope we can maybe discuss something we as PATHOS can put on the website or on Instagram to show our solidarity with Polish women. And like this. And here on this card it says it's time to drink champagne and dance on the table. But it's time for solidarity, so maybe we can change. No, but I thought
Self-care and response.
Yeah. But last year when you were here with Van Geite, it was really like dancing on the table and drinking champagne. And this year it felt so different. But still I feel that we should drink and dance because you made it possible, yeah? And you put all this energy. Ihr wart so beharrlich und so wahnsinnig engagiert und deshalb finde ich, müssen wir unbedingt Champagner trinken und 1000 Dank. Ich wollte euch noch diese Blumen überreichen. Ja, wirklich, ihr seid 2 so wunderbare Frauen, also 3 so wunderbare Frauen, wirklich. Und ich
books instead of flowers.
Ja. Also wirklich 1000 Dank von uns allen und wir hoffen, dass, genau, wie du gesagt hast, dass der deutsch-polnische Dialog hier am PATHOS Museum /Theater, ja, auf jeden Fall, dass es weitergeht. Danke euch, 1000 Dank. Thank you all.